afternoon. The President will be speaking at 2:30 on the administration's efforts to reduce red tape and federal regulations. Within 10 days of taking office, President Trump issued Executive Order 13771, instructing the Office of Management and Budget to remove 2 government regulations for every new one created. Washington scoffed, but the administration acted. In under a year, we have unleashed the American economy, businesses, and job creation. These efforts and the rest of the President's agenda have fueled economic growth, including all-time highs in the stock market, a 17-year low in unemployment rolls, new highs in manufacturing and consumer confidence, and much more. As the President said yesterday, we're at the final stages of historic tax cuts and reforms that will provide massive relief to middle-class families, lower tax rates on American businesses to make us more competitive, and make our tax code simpler and fairer for the first time in decades. We want to begin lowering the tax bills in Americans' paychecks starting next year, where Americans who face economic headwinds for 8 years will have the wind at their backs as they seek the American dream. And with that, we'll get started because we are on a short time frame, and I will take your questions. Jonathan.
Sarah, on the taxes, what is the President's message to those Americans, including some in the middle class, who will face tax increases under this tax bill?
Look, our focus since day one has been to aggressively push to make sure as many Americans as possible get a tax break, particularly those in the middle class. That's going to continue to be our focus as we continue in this process, as I've said time and time again.
But the message to those that will face an increase, every analysis has shown some people, including middle class Americans, are going to face an increase.
And overwhelmingly, the middle class will get a huge tax break, as most Americans will, and that is, again, is our goal, is to make sure that more Americans see more of their hard-earned money. That's what we're pushing for. That's what we're going to keep working with the House and Senate to make sure happens. John?
On taxes, you've got 2 no's in the Senate so far. You've got Senator Corker, who's been a no for a while. Senator Rubio came out and told us a short time ago that he's a no unless he can get an expansion of the child tax credit. Is the President willing to be a little more generous in the child tax credit in order to get Senator Rubio's vote?
Look, we're really proud of the work that we've done already up until this point with Senator Rubio, already doubling the child tax credit, taking it to $2,000 per child. We're going to continue working with the Senator, but we think we've made great strides and, frankly, pretty historic movement in terms of the child tax credit. We're very proud of that work. We're going to keep working with them until we get the job done, which we still expect to happen before the end of the year.
Is there more room to move?
Right now, we're going to focus on letting some of the Senate move forward in the progression of their conversations. Again, we're extremely excited about the progress that we've already made to double the child tax credit. I think that's something important to note, and something that we've worked very closely with Senator Rubio on, and we think he should be very excited about the progress we've made on that front. Connie? Merry Christmas to you as well.
Thank you. What have you learned this past year? What changes would you make in the coming year?
What have I learned this past year? I would have to say that we would be here a really long time if I walked through everything I've learned this past year. But some of my favorite things would probably be to take time to appreciate some of the really incredible moments and the special time and opportunity and honor that certainly that I have, but I think that all of us have, that we get to come to the White House every day, serve our country, and we get to call it work. I think that's pretty impressive, pretty amazing, and something that I hope none of us ever lose sight of. Thanks, Connie. Mara.
Thank you, Sarah. Does the President think that Roy Moore should concede? In other words, does he believe he lost the election fair and square, or does he think he was the victim of widespread illegitimate voting?
I think the President's position is pretty clear in his outreach to Doug Jones directly. He called and they spoke yesterday. They had a great conversation, a very positive conversation. He likes Doug Jones and looks forward to meeting him in person, and hopes that he will come and follow through on his commitment to work with the President on some things that they agree on.
So Roy Moore
Jordan?
lost fair and square. That's what you're saying.
I think the numbers reflect that, and I think the President's outreach shows that. Jordan?
Thanks, Sarah. There's some reports out this morning that Speaker Ryan is considering stepping down at the end of this Congress. Has the president spoken to Speaker Ryan about those reports, and does he want to see Speaker Ryan continue in that role?
The president did speak to the speaker not too long ago and made sure that the speaker knew very clearly and in no uncertain terms that if that news was true, he was very unhappy with it. The speaker assured the president that those were not accurate reports and that they looked forward to working together for a long time to come. Blake?
So did this catch the president by surprise, the Ryan report that was out today?
It sounds like it may have caught Speaker Ryan by surprise because I don't think it was very accurate reporting. And so it sounds like they're both committed to and looking forward to spending a lot more time together over the next, hopefully 7-8 years.
Let me ask you about Marco Rubio as well. We have heard folks who might be no votes, potentially undecided votes. But Marco Rubio's potential no vote is one that we know he had concerns, but him voting no is seemingly here suddenly out of left field. Has that caught the White House by surprise at all, or have you braced for the possibility that you might not have Marco Rubio in your corner?
I'm not sure if the president's spoken with him specifically today. Again, we're proud of the work that we've done with Senator Rubio, and we look forward to making sure that the progress that we made to double the child care tax credit, that's kind of a mouthful, goes into full effect when this piece of legislation is signed. April?
Sarah, two things. Should Roy Moore just give his concession speech now versus holding it out?
It probably sounds like it should have already taken place. Look, the president's already called and congratulated Doug Jones and expressed his willingness to work with him and to meet with him when he arrives in Washington.
And the second issue, did you watch GMA this morning, and what are your thoughts about this tell-all and the uncomfortability of Omarosa while she was here with some issues?
I did see some clips of that in terms of a tell-all. That's a question I think you would have to ask her. She resigned from her position yesterday. She'll be here later this afternoon. We put out a statement yesterday. I don't have any changes to add to that, and certainly, as has been the practice in the past and will continue to be in the future, we don't comment much further than that on personnel matters. Chip?
Sarah, why is if she's resigned and she is going to
sitting next to each other.
If she's resigned, but you said she will stay on, Omarosa will stay on through January 20th. Why are the taxpayers continuing to pay her salary for another month if she's no longer here at the White House?
As I just said, I'm not going to weigh in any further, as we often do, and as the practice, we're not going to get deeper into personnel matters. We've put out a statement. The president likes Omarosa, thanked her for her service, and again, she'll be here later this afternoon. So. She's resigned from her position, but there's really nothing else to add on that front.
Why is she still on the payroll for another month? Is that normal?
Look, there's a lot of different protocols that take place in the government. That's part of the process. If you want to reach out to HR, they might be able to walk you through that in a more detailed way. Certainly not that I'm privy to. Thankfully, I haven't been through the process myself, so I can't speak to it from firsthand.
On a separate matter, on the tax plan, if I could just ask, would the president ask the House and Senate to stay here in Washington and finish this bill, even if it means bleeding into the Christmas holiday?
We're pretty confident that we're going to get there before then, but this is something that I think that both the House, the Senate, and the President are all committed to seeing happen, and we're very hopeful that it will take place at the first of next week. Jeff?
Sarah, does the President have any thoughts about the Disney deal to buy 21st Century Fox?
I know that the President spoke with Rupert Murdoch earlier today, congratulated him on the deal, and thinks that, to use one of the President's favorite words, that this could be a great thing for jobs, and certainly looks forward to and hoping to see a lot more of those created.
What does the President think about the FTC decision on net neutrality? There are a lot of Americans, polls show, who are very opposed to that change.
Look, the Trump administration supports the FCC's effort to roll back burdensome regulations, but as we have always done and will continue to do, we certainly support a free and fair internet. Anything beyond that, I'd refer you to the FCC. Matthew?
Getting back to that Alabama result, has what happened down there changed the president's relationship at all with Steve Bannon, given his big support for Moore, and has it changed the president's thoughts on Mr. Bannon's opposition to other incumbent Republican senators?
That's a question you'd have to ask Mr. Bannon. I'm certainly not going to speak for him.
His relationship.
I know that was the second part of the question you asked about whether or not he would support more candidates, and I can't answer that. In terms of their relationship, I haven't spoken with the president directly about the nature of that relationship and whether that has altered it. Francesca?
Thank you, sir. I know that you said that you can't go much further on this personnel matter, but I do want to try to separate out some of the things that we're hearing here and just be crystal clear. So you're saying that Omarosa Manigault was not fired on Tuesday evening, that she didn't get belligerent in her conversation with General Kelly, she wasn't yelling at him, she wasn't cursing at him, and she wasn't escorted off the property. Secret Service said not by them, but she wasn't escorted off the property by someone or some entity other than Secret Service that evening.
Look, as I said, Omarosa resigned from her position. I'm not going to go into a detailed process any further than that. We've put out a statement as is standard practice. We're not going to get into the weeds of a personnel decision here at the White House.
Access to the White House complex?
In an interview with Stat News this morning, Kellyanne Conway said she and other administration officials have been urging Congress to appropriate additional funding for the opioid epidemic. The president declared a public health emergency earlier this fall, but that fund only has $57,000 in it. Economists have predicted that it'll cost upwards of $190 billion over a decade to treat the crisis. Can you tell us how much money that the White House will be urging Congress to appropriate? And what do you have to say to critics who believe that the president hasn't dedicated enough resources to combating the epidemic this year?
Look, one of the reasons that the president has put one of his top people here at the White House, Kellyanne Conway, on this is because he sees this as a priority. He sees it as a major concern, not just for the White House, but certainly for America. There's a number of stories, as you just said. The amount of money that it will take to combat this crisis is huge. We're going to continue looking at the best ways to do that. We're working an interagency process to see what that number looks like. That hasn't been finalized, but we're going to continue looking at every way possible. I don't right now. That's still part of
$45 billion. That was part of the Republican health care plan.
Look, that's I think a start, but to fully address this, we want to make sure that we get it right and make sure that we really address this head on. And that's why the president has made it such a focus and put Kellyanne and others here at the White House to really make an emphasis and make that a priority.
Is that something that you guys will get done, that appropriation by the end of this year? Can the president promise that?
I'm not aware that we can promise that a full funding for that would take place by the end of this year. This wasn't a problem that happened overnight. We're not going to be able to fix it overnight. But what we want to do is make sure that we address it and that we make it a priority for the administration. And we're going to continue doing that until we beat it. The president's spoken about this several times and making sure that we address it from all fronts and all sides. Kristen.
Thank you. With Omarosa leaving, how many senior staffers here at the White House are African American?
Look, we have a really diverse team across the board at the White House. We always want to continue to grow the diversity here. We're going to continue to do that and continue to work hard. I don't have a number directly in front of me, specifically not African American, but I can say, again, we have a very diverse team at the White House, certainly a very diverse team in the press office, and something that we strive for every day is to add and grow to be more diverse and more representative of the country at large, and we're going to continue to do that.
She was really tasked with reaching out to the African American community. Who have you identified who is going to take that role, and how critical is it to this president, to this administration, to make sure that that role is in fact filled?
Yeah, I think there are a number of people that will be part of that process and have been part of that process that will continue to be. This wasn't something that was a singular effort by any one individual. You have a member on the cabinet, Ben Carson, I know has been engaged and talked with the president on this issue, but it's not just within the White House. The president met with Senator Tim Scott. I know he wants to continue those conversations as well to look at the best ways to do that and to do outreach to that community.
And just to follow up on one of April's questions, what Omarosa said today was, I've seen things that have made me uncomfortable, that have upset me, that have affected me deeply and emotionally, that has affected my community and my people. Were her concerns ever addressed or dealt with?
The comments that she made, that was the first time I'd heard those. Whether she raised them with other individuals, I'm not aware. I know she regularly brought up specific issues where they were talked about in meetings, and we addressed them at the time.
Any of the issues where any of her concerns were?
I don't. That's a question that you would have to ask her, and I'm certainly not going to speak on her behalf in that regard. But I do know that it's something that we take seriously and something that we want to see improve, I think, across all fronts. So, here, Margaret.
Sarah, today is the 5th anniversary of the Sandy Hook massacre in which so many children were killed. That, of course, as a tragedy, was eclipsed by what happened in Las Vegas, which is now the most tragic and mass shooting on U.S. soil. Since that time, what has President Trump done to try to protect the American people against a similar type of massacre? Does he think anything's been done? What is the administration trying to do? Is there anything at the executive level that he thinks needs to be undertaken?
Look, I think that there are a number of different ways that we look to protect our citizens every single day. One of the areas that the president has been outspoken about, not necessarily to those two instances, but just more broadly speaking in terms of national security and protecting individuals, certainly through border security, stronger vetting processes, and looking at whether or not there are other regulations that we could put in place that would offer protection.
These weren't people who entered the United States.
Right, and I said I'm speaking more broadly in terms of national security as a whole. And look, this is a president who knows that his number one responsibility is to look for ways to protect American citizens, and we try to do that every single day. And whether or not there's a regulation that could be put in place or not that could have prevented those things, frankly, I'm not aware of what that would be, but we want to look for every opportunity, every way possible that we can to protect American lives, and we're going to continue doing that.
Is it correct to say that the administration is looking at how to prevent these kind of mass shootings by domestic shooters on U.S. soil?
I know that. I know that's something that absolutely. I know that's something that the Department of Homeland Security looks at and talks about and works on every single day. I don't think there's a person in this country that wouldn't like us to find ways to protect people, and we're certainly very supportive of that. And that's something that would be
that the president has highlighted that says he wants to.
Well, I don't think there's any one thing that you could do that could have prevented either one of those instances, those horrible, horrible tragedies.
These were prescriptions given very quickly just the other day for this failed terrorist attack, which is why in these cases, I mean, this is the worst shooting on U.S. soil. On
I understand that, and that's why I also think that you have to take these matters obviously very seriously. But if you could name a single thing that would have prevented both of these, I'd love to hear it, because I don't know what that would look like. But we're looking every single day at how you can protect American lives, how we can best protect American citizens. In terms of New York, we know for a fact this individual came through chain migration system. This is something the president has been outspokenly against and something that he wants to stop. And that individual wouldn't have been here in order to commit that crime if that wasn't in place. So that's a fact that we do know.
The assault weapons ban, any kind of regulation, any kind of mental health concerns. The president has specifically mentioned that as a possibility.
I know that they're looking at some of the mental health issues. It's something the president has raised before, but in terms of a specific policy that we're moving forward with that would have prevented that, I'm not aware of what that would be. Trey?
Thanks, Sarah. Has the president expressed any concerns regarding the FCC's decision today to roll back these Obama-era regulations on net neutrality? And then moving forward, are there any assurances that the White House can offer to the American people who are concerned that the decision and vote today will lead to a less free internet?
As I said a few minutes ago, the administration supports the FCC's efforts, and at the same time, the White House certainly has and always will support a free and fair internet. We'll take one last question for the day. Brian.
I'm going to ask you a question about taxes. The Federal Reserve yesterday said that the tax bill would provide a modest lift to the economy. That's in stark contrast to words that the president has used, like rocket fuel to the economy. What is the data that the president is basing his rosier picture of the impact on the economy of the tax bill versus the experts at the Federal Reserve?
Look, there are several individuals I would point you to. Kevin Hassett, who has spoken in this room and on a number of networks that I see represented here, that has repeatedly stated that a lot of the statistics, a lot of the data shows that this will be a huge boost to the economy. It will bring companies back. It will grow our jobs, push the stock market higher. I think that those are all places I would point back to, and certainly I think there's great support that we have seen just based on the idea that this passes, that you're seeing the stock market increase, and they think a lot of that is tied to that. So
that the word modest was used?
I haven't asked him about that. I think upset's maybe not the right word. He might think that the other opinions that have been offered are a little more accurate. So
the Treasury analysis used
the president. Hold on just a second, because I know that the call time is here momentarily, and the president will be speaking here in a few minutes. Just want to say thanks. Have a good week, and April, I'm looking forward to having some pie with you here momentarily. Thanks, guys.
Can we get him out here? Can we get the president out here? Be speaking with Senator Rubio today.
And welcome to the briefing room. I'm BBC's Megan Hughes with the Pennsylvania Avenue team. I'm joined today with Tara Palmieri, our White House correspondent, and Mary Alice Parks, our political reporter. And ladies, we have a huge news day today. We're learning more from that White House briefing right there about Omarosa's dramatic departure from the White House. We had a huge vote on internet rules in front of the FCC today, and the tax reform bill, which House and Senate negotiators are trying desperately to get across the finish line. I want to bring in our Allie Rogan from Capitol Hill to give us the very latest on that. Allie, we're hearing that this bill now may be on life support, that there are some key Republican senators who may not be behind it anymore.
Wild changes in these last few minutes. Actually, this bill's fate was, we thought, sealed, but then in the last few minutes, its fate, it's currently now on DOA watch. We've learned that Senator Marco Rubio is saying he cannot vote for this bill as long as it contains a child tax credit that he believes is not generous enough. You add Rubio saying that he won't support this bill. We already have Senator Bob Corker, who has said he will not vote for the bill. The Republicans can only afford to lose 2 Senate Republican votes and still pass this thing. So if they lose one more, this bill is done. And Senator Mike Lee has also been very vocal in terms of the child tax credit along with Rubio. We haven't heard from Lee's office yet, but if he's a no, this thing's dead.
And Allie, we're still trying to figure out exactly what's in it. And I understand we're supposed to be seeing some final language maybe tomorrow. What can you tell us that we now know has been agreed upon?
Yeah, Megan, we expect the final draft of this bill. It's the agreement between House and Senate negotiators to be out tomorrow, but we are seeing some of the broad outlines that have been hammered out. Chief among them, you're going to see the top rate, income tax rate for the highest earners go down. So that's something that is slightly different than what House and Senate negotiators were working on previously. The corporate tax rate also goes down from 35% to 21%. Folks will be able to deduct from their mortgage payments up to $750,000. Folks will also be able to deduct up to $10,000 in state and local taxes. That's going to help folks in some of those high tax states like New York, New Jersey, and California. But again, nothing, as folks around here say, nothing is agreed to until everything's agreed to. We expect to see that final bill out tomorrow with votes scheduled for early next week.
And obviously the stakes are huge for the White House here. Sanders taking some questions on this today, sounding upbeat.
I mean, they've been desperate for a win. We've been talking about this for weeks, but we've also been talking about the fact that there's a difference between a legislative victory and a political victory. And I wonder if some of those senators who are now teetering are worried that this is just too hard of a sell back home.
And Allie, while you're still with us, I do want to bring in another big story on Capitol Hill today. Speaker Ryan fending off reports that really seem to come out of the blue that he may be not around for very much longer. And Sarah Sanders had to answer some questions about that today. What can you tell us? What are we hearing from Ryan's office?
So Politico is reporting that Ryan plans to step down from his speakership after 2018, but his office is pushing back on that hard. They say that is absolute fabrication, not true at all. But they didn't really give any guidance about how long he wants to stay on. So we'll have to stay tuned to see whether or not he says anything more on this. But look, the parlor game of speculating on when speakers are going to step down is a time-honored tradition in Washington, going back through all kinds of speakers. But Ryan in particular is in such an interesting spot right now. He's trying to get the ball down the field with his key priorities that he's been trying to do since he was a staffer up here. He was an intern on the Hill. These are things he's devoted to: tax reform, entitlement reform. You can imagine that if he gets these things done by the end of his speakership, by the end of 2018, he might say, okay, it's time to hang it up. He's got kids that are about a couple years from going off to college, so he said a lot about how he wishes he were around them more. So all these things do seem to kind of fit together, but for now, his office is saying there is no validity to these rumors.
Allie, I like that. I've been on a number of speaker watches. I know you've been on a number of speaker watches. Thank you so much for joining us. A time-honored tradition. It is. Thank you for joining us from the Hill. Tara, I want to turn to you on what this any Speaker Ryan resignation or ouster would mean for the president.
Well, the president and Speaker Ryan have had a pretty rocky relationship off the bat. He's a bit of a whipping boy for Trump. I've heard from aides that he can get really testy with Ryan, putting him on speakerphone and often blasting him in front of other aides, demanding loyalty, demanding, more support. Ryan has been walking a really a tightrope essentially since this president came on. He's chosen some really controversial, unpopular positions. He's really been dividing his party. But at the end of the day, they've managed to patch up their relationship, and he's starting to make ground with Mitch McConnell as well. So I think that Trump would be having to deal with a new person, and he has a particular personality, so.
and a clever transition here. The White House, we know, will be dealing with a new person in whoever Omarosa's replacement is going to be.
If they replace her, though, because this was never a job in the White House before. Director of Communications for the Office of Public Liaison, they made that job for her.
Right. And now they're taking a lot of questions about what her departure will mean for diversity in the White House.
Exactly. Or the other question I thought was interesting was, why is she staying on until January 20th if her badge has basically been revoked and she can only get access to small parts of the compound? What is she doing for the next 3 weeks? They couldn't even give us any explanation of what work she's wrapping up, right?
That's right. And actually, we have our Cecilia Vega now joining us from the White House. She was inside that briefing. Cecilia, what were your takeaways when it comes to this whole Omarosa situation?
Well, I think there's a big question for this White House here that Sarah Sanders wasn't actually able to answer inside is who's in charge of African-American outreach now for this administration? Sarah was asked directly how many African-American members of the senior staff exist, and she couldn't give a number. She said she was very proud of the diversity on this staff. I've got to say it's a pretty clear observation. You don't see a lot of ethnically diverse faces in this administration, at least at the senior levels. Certainly, the president's cabinet has a few faces that they would point to, absolutely. But Omarosa, for better or worse, loved and hated universally in this administration and outside, was in fact the only African-American face inside the room in many occasions. And so you've got to ask now who plays that role, who raises issues, who brings up questions behind closed doors and in these meetings here in this administration. The White House so far doesn't have an answer for that.
And we heard from Omarosa herself on Good Morning America this morning. We're also going to be hearing from her again on a special edition of Nightline this evening. Cecilia, while we have you with us, can you just tell us, we're going to be hearing from this woman for some time, I believe. She hinted that she has a lot more to say, and she's going to be on the staff until January 20th. What do you think we can expect from her?
Anything and everything, guys. We're talking about Omarosa here, the woman with one name. Look, it's anybody's guess. She says that there were a lot of things that she heard here in the White House that made her uncomfortable, angry, unhappy about hearing, that has made her question, I think, some occasions and instances, events that she's been a part of. She's not elaborating at this point. She still is on the payroll here, it sounds like, until January 20th, and which is another question the White House isn't answering is why are taxpayers paying for that if she's resigned and not actually working here? Why are taxpayers footing the bill for another month? So another lingering question. But look, the White House says that they're not necessarily concerned. Everybody will wait and see what Omarosa has to say. She is promising a big story to tell. Perhaps that's her reality television background that she's tapping into there. We'll all watch, I'm
Vega,
sure.
thank you so much for joining us. Very busy day at the White House. We appreciate it. And moving on, another huge story today for wonks. Net neutrality, this word that every time it gets brought up, some people in the newsroom cringe. I'm kind of into it, I gotta say. I was watching. So net neutrality, these internet rules that, depending on who you ask, some say would allow internet service providers to block or have preferential treatment for some websites over others. Got knocked down today. 3-2 vote, party line vote. There was also some drama. The whole room was evacuated. There was some kind of security threat right before the vote.
Right, with the cell phones too.
Yeah.
You know, I think that it's interesting that here in Washington we often sort of shy away from this issue. It's been really politically toxic and like you said, sort of seen as wonky and technical. But when you get outside of DC, people are really engaged on this, and I think on a level that maybe politicians are only now starting to understand. Huge grassroots organizing around this issue, calls to Capitol Hill, calls to local elected officials. There's a segment of the population that is very worried about how this could impact small businesses and especially small tech businesses.
It's mostly, our generation that is concerned about this, and I think you can also see about along party lines how people are voting based on net neutrality laws. When I was based in Brussels, it was a huge issue in Europe. I mean, they're still struggling with just actually they're so overly regulated. The entire continent is geo-blocked by country, even though they're about the same distance as states. But it's not something that we're grappling with. There's an extreme of what Europe has, and then the next extreme, which is obviously no regulation at all.
Right, and when it comes to how these regulations, I mean, first of all, you've got this tax reform bill, which has the impact, could potentially impact every single American. You've got these new net neutrality rules being knocked down. That reform, that deregulation could impact every single American. This is going to impact our economy. This is going to impact the business environment. So for me, looking forward in the year ahead, the years ahead, it's going to be on us, journalists. It's going to be on the wonky people in think tanks, the number crunchers, to really see, because we've gotten some very, very different prognostication about what these things are going to mean for people.
Absolutely.
They're going to affect people, but how?
And everyone has a different number and a different figure, and it's a matter of really digging into it and finding, what sources are credible, who's got the right figures.
And any other final thoughts? We're going into, as I mentioned, this is going to be maybe the year ahead, but now we're looking at the week ahead. President Trump leaves for Florida December 20th, so the countdown begins. We're less than a week away. What are you guys watching?
I think that everyone is still watching what happened in Alabama. I was struck there. Sarah Sanders said, the president likes Democrat Doug Jones. That was not apparent in the days leading up to the election, that's sure.
I think he said he was dangerous.
Basically tried to paint him as a crazy liberal, but there from the podium, she was essentially trying to make nice. I was struck by the fact that Doug Jones himself was trying to make nice with the White House before he gets to Washington, saying that he was really looking forward to sitting down in the White House. So
that was a smart move, though.
It was a smart, very savvy
considering
move.
that Trump is so popular in Alabama.
Absolutely. It was very much an acknowledgement that the majority of the people that he will be representing voted for the current commander-in-chief. So maybe some potential for bipartisanship between those two men, or at least a change in tone. But clearly a lot of Republicans are going to be dissecting the numbers out of there and dissecting, like you said, sort of which stories and which topics and which policies really are driving people's interest and bringing them to the polls. I was down in Alabama and did not have one voter talk to me about taxes. No one was saying I'm placing some vote because I'm concerned about that legislation. The FEC rules came up, but obviously big items like healthcare and education still really at the front and center of people's minds.
Tara?
I would agree with that. I think there's just so much conflicting information that people are sort of thinking that the tax bill will be a wash. Maybe they'll end up paying a little bit more in local state. Maybe the federal income tax will balance it out. There's so many factors. They're likely going to be keep writing all over this bill and until the last minute. And so I think voters are just so confused by what they're seeing right now. And they feel more empowered by things that are more tangible, like
And the only
healthcare.
thing they know for sure is that it's going to benefit corporations, and that part is not popular.
Yes. I think one of the things I'm going to be watching, I'm surprised to be saying this, but that this bill has turned into a nail biter. You know, this morning it was all about doing the number crunching. How is this going to impact you? What does this mean for state and local taxes? What's in the bill, which we still don't, have the final answer there. But at this hour, do they have the votes to actually get this across the finish line? And obviously the president using this Christmas time, this is going to be a Christmas present. He's really set the bar that the deadline is Christmas.
Well, we'll see. Will the president actually decide to start his vacation a little bit later? Will he stay in Congress? Will he try to get his fellow lawmakers to stay and actually push this forward?
Will he move Christmas?
Exactly. Will he move Christmas?
But we've seen this be a problem before when the president has tried to set a hard and fast deadline, like maybe a CEO would do. And frankly, that's just not always how Washington works.
And I will say that we heard Speaker Ryan reiterate the president's promise yesterday that February, people were going to start seeing the impact of tax reform in February. So stay tuned. And obviously, you can get all the latest updates on abcnews.com. Thanks for joining us in the briefing room.